There was a fellow traveling across the country, across the middle of the country, Kansas, and he decided to take just a little jaunt back through some country back roads. And he was on a little dirt road, and he made a corner a little bit too wide, and he took both of his right-hand tires and ended up in a ditch. And he was having a hard time getting that car out, and he looked around, and he knew his miles from any closest town, and it was a very hot July day, and he was just like, oh. Well, when he got out of the car, he looked, and over on the side, there was a farmer who saw his predicament, and the farmer was leading a large, looked like plow horse, his way, and the farmer had a harness with him, and he was thinking, oh, maybe this fella can help me. Well, anyway, so the farmer came up and looked at the situation. He told the man, this is my horse, buddy, and, we'll get this car out of the ditch for you. The guy was like, wow. So the farmer took the harness and attached it to Buddy and attached it to the back end of the car and moved Buddy out a ways where the leather straps were taut. And out there, the farmer turned to Buddy and said, Polly, pull. And Buddy did nothing, just flinched his ears. And then the farmer said, Roscoe, pull. And Buddy didn't do anything. He said, Abraham, pull, and did nothing. And finally, almost off the cuff, the farmer just said, pull, Buddy, pull. And Buddy began to pull on those leather straps, and slowly the back right tire came out of the ditch, and the right front tire came out of the ditch, and the man was just amazed at what he had just seen. And so the farmer left Buddy down here, and he went back to talk to the traveler, and the traveler said, I am so thankful that you got our car out of the ditch, or my car out of the ditch, but I am curious about one thing. Why did you call Buddy by 3 different names that weren't his? The farmer said, oh, that's easy. Buddy's blind, and if he knew he was having to do all the pulling by himself, he wouldn't have even started. Now, in that story is the power of one word, and it's the word I want to talk about today, with. And in this particular sense, God is with us, and that's supposed to make a difference in our lives. But God being with us also provides a model for how we're to be with other people, meaning your husband or your wife, or your teenagers, or your older parents, or friends, or people in the church. We're going to take 5 Sundays, including this one, to talk about what I think of as redemptive relating. How does God relate to us redemptively? And then how are we to relate to other people redemptively in the same way? And we're going to look at 5 prepositions. The first one is with. What does it mean to be with? And for some of you, you think about your husband or wife, or if you're raising teenagers, what does it mean to be with your teenagers? Or difficult people, or people who are struggling. Next week, we'll look at the preposition for. The 3rd week is toward, the 4th week is in, and the last week is up. All 5 of those provide some real gold in terms of building relationships with people. When I think about the word with, if I were to say it as simply as possible, it's this way. Your presence matters. Your presence with people matters. When I think of with, that's what I think about. Now, I want you to imagine a hypothetical. You're taking a break from work, and you're going out for lunch, and you happen to drive over to Chili's on Barranca. And as you walk in, you look over to the right, and at the far right-hand side in the corner of the building, there's a booth there, and you see me sitting there. And you think, well, I'm just here by myself. So you walk over, and you say, hi, Pastor Seth, and I say hi to you. And I say, you want to join me? And to say you do. And you ask me the question, well, how's it going? How's it going with you? And let's say that I begin to say, and you get the sense that I am very sorrowful. And then you begin to sense that I feel just really burdened down and just discouraged or disillusioned or maybe finally overwhelmed. What would be going through your mind? What would you want to say to me? Now, I suspect that you're not any different than I would. What would come to your mind are things like, Well, Seth, you're just being too hard on yourself. Or some of you might say, well, Seth, have you been in the Word lately? How's your prayer life? Is something wrong with you and Mindy? Is there something wrong with your kids? Are you thinking about leaving the church or leaving the profession? Or you might be thinking, I think I need to find another church and a more godly pastor. Perhaps those thoughts run through your mind. Now, the thoughts that run through your mind are dependent on what you think the real battle is that I'm facing. And most likely what happens to us is what we assume is that what each of us needs in that moment is advice or perspective or encouragement. Now those things, there's a place for all of those things. But is that the real battle that I would be facing that morning? Or maybe what I really need is something that I'm calling with. Somebody just to be with me, to listen to what I'm saying and to hear me and to recognize, or so that maybe something resonates with you on that. Most of the time what we think of as advice or help. Now, that hypothetical is built on two real stories. The first story is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he goes to pray just before he's about to be betrayed and arrested. And the three things we'll look at in a few minutes are he felt sorrowful, he was burdened, and he felt overwhelmed to the point of death. Those are the three phrases. Overwhelmed to the point of death. That's what I try to describe me sitting at Chili's in the booth there. Now, the response that you or I might make is built on the response of Job's three friends and how they dealt with Job when he was going through some really, really awful suffering. They illustrated how not to be with somebody else when they were going through those situations. But those things just come so easily to us. And most of the time, we end up discouraging the very person we want to encourage. That's what we're going to look at today. The first half of the message is God with us. What does that mean? The second half is what does it mean to be with people in the same way God is with us? Well, the word Emmanuel means God with us. That's the Hebrew word for that. In Matthew 1, the virgin will be with child and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Now, if you've read much of the Old Testament, this is a very familiar theme, all the way back to the beginning with Adam and Eve. God was with Adam and Eve in the garden. He fellowshiped with them. God was with Noah. God was with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. God was with Moses. God was with Joseph. Joshua. God was with King David. All the way through, God wants to be with his people. In that 40-year wilderness wandering out in the desert when the people were spiritually dysfunctional, just terrible people, God still wanted to be with his people. And there was a reason for that. His presence would help. That's a very common theme. Well, what I'd like to do is look at one particular aspect of this or illustration of this, and that's with Moses. God meets Moses in Exodus chapter 3 at what we call the burning bush. And he speaks out of that burning bush to Moses. Exodus 3:18. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Not just that God exists and that God wants something, but he has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. So Moses gets this message from Pharaoh. He knows, or from God. He knows that over in Egypt there are about 2 million people of his people in slavery. And he gets the message, go to Pharaoh, who is the main guy there in the world, and tell him to let my people go. And Moses kind of like, do you know what you're asking? He's not going to listen to me. Well, we come to chapter 5, and Moses has gone. He's talked to the elders, the leaders there of the Hebrew people, and they go to Pharaoh. They said, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Same idea, with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. Now, The short answer here is that Pharaoh finally relents after 10 plagues. The people are let go. They cross through the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea. The Egyptian army is drowned, and the people are rescued out of slavery. And yet, if you know the story, within days, these people are grumbling and complaining about almost anything. They're just so petty, and they just cannot see the forest for the trees. We want to go back to Egypt. We had good food back there. What are you going to do for water? They were like spoiled children to Moses. And over the course of time, Moses just about had it up to here with drama. And when I think about drama, you can look at Numbers 11, 12, 14, and chapter 16. It's just mind-numbing drama with people. And he's finally just sort of had it up to here at one point, and he goes to God with this question, Exodus 33:15. Moses said to God, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here." In other words, life is going to be so messy and so difficult that if you are not present with us to help us overcome this, why even go? He can see unmitigated disaster without the presence of God. Verse 16, Moses says, "How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people? Unless you go with us, what else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And that was the point of them going to the promised land, so that people would see by the way that people were living and relating to God and the social network that they were supposed to have, that other people would say, how do they do that? How can they build that kind of country or that kind of community or those kinds of relationships? That's what was supposed to happen. And the only way Moses saw that could happen is if God's presence was with them. But this is also true, God's presence is also true in a very personal way. Not just generically at a country level or even in a household, but personally. In Malachi 1:10, Malachi is trying to get a hold of his people and speak to them, and they're basically just sort of being religious enough to get the life they want. They're sort of playing, let's make a deal with God. If we be religious and go through all these things, then will you give us the blessings that we want? And here's God's response to this. Why doesn't one of you just shut the temple doors and lock them? Don't even bother is the idea. Then none of you can get in and play at religion with a silly, empty-headed worship. I am not pleased. Now, what was the problem? There was something more important to them than their relationship with God, and that was what we call in our culture the good life, the blessings. And they were willing to be as religious as they needed to be in order to sort of guarantee or twist God's arm that he would come through for them. In other words, God was saying, you want something more than you want me. And that very item is the thing that's tripping you up. It what causes pressure in your life and discouragement. And it causes conflict in your household or in your community or stress. There's something that people wanted more than God. Hebrews 13:5, God says, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." It's a very familiar verse, and if you've been a Christian a while, it's probably a verse that you think about a lot. And yet, it's so easy, I think, for us to sort of feel like we're on this scale or on this treadmill, and we've got to keep running in order for God to stay with us. Now, why is that? Even though in our heads we know that that's stupid theology. We live by grace and the wonder of God's acceptance. We are not on treadmills to try to prove ourselves. That's not the gospel at all. Why do we do that? Well, I think sometimes our pride jumps in here. We want to be able to pat ourselves on the back and point to what we did to deserve God's blessings. But I think another thing happens to us, in that if you're old enough, you have experienced the awful sting of betrayal, or somebody who pledged to be with you or promised to be with you, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a business partner, and they bailed on you, and you were left to deal with the aftermath of that, the ashes of that. And sometimes I think that's sort of could that ever happen with God? I never saw it coming with this person. Could this happen with God. Well, Joshua, when he's taking over from Moses, which was a gigantic challenge, no man shall be able to stand before you, God said, all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, which would have been obvious to Joshua, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Now, before we move on to what does it mean to, in the same way, be with people the way God is with us, I want to ask you all a question. This issue of, is God really with me no matter what? If you are one of his people through Jesus Christ, then I hope you will lock the cabinet on this truth, because it's one of those truths that is just splattered everywhere from beginning to end in the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. God not just is with us, but he wants to be with us. If you find yourself wondering about that or thinking about the metric of I'm just not very good or I keep failing, well, welcome to the club. But the door is locked on this item. God wants to be with you. And that is sacrosanct. What does this mean to relate to the people in our lives? What does it mean to be with people in the same way God is with us? Now, there are ways not to do this. And I was reminded of this when a pastor friend was getting ready to move churches, and he was an older fella, getting ready to move to a different part. It was his last Sunday, and he's standing out by the back on the front door, and people are walking by and, giving goodbye and thank you for being here, and we'll miss you. And there was one old lady that came up, and she said, well, Pastor, I just know that whoever succeeds you is not going to be as good as you. And the pastor was kind of flattered by that. Well, thank you. But why do you say that? She said, well, I've been here at this church a long time, and I've been here through 5 pastors, and every time we get a new one, he's never as good as the last one. Well, she may have wanted to encourage the fellow, but something went awry there. Well, when I think about this, I think about the story of Job and Job's friends. If you know the story, Job went through just about some of the worst suffering that anybody could go through. Over the course of chapter 1, he lost all 10 of his children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, some to enemies who came and killed them, and some to something like a hurricane or a tornado. They all died. Along with that, he lost all of his land holdings. He was a rancher. All of his ranch houses were blown down or taken. He lost all of his herds and flocks. He became penniless. And then as the story continues on, he ends up getting a disease where he has boils covered from head to toe. It's just an awful period of suffering. Now, I am always curious, as Satan was allowed to be a part of this, and I am quite curious as to why Satan didn't take out Job's wife. Maybe Satan thought he had an ally living at home. That's probably something we should look at a marriage series. Anyway, but Job responded pretty well at the beginning. But over time, he started to have all kinds of questions and doubts and struggles, and he was just wrestling with this. And those if you've been through times like this, you can't go to sleep at night, or you wake up early in the morning, and you just live in sort of this pit of discouragement and sometimes despair. Well, this book of Job says that Job had 3 friends, and for the first 7 days, they were with him. They didn't say anything, but at least they were with him, which was a help. But at the end of 7 days, God bless their little hearts, they could not keep from opening their mouth and making a mess of things. And over the course of the book, we have the friends giving their advice and their help to try to help Job. And it was just a nightmare for Job. It made his life worse and worse. It was sort of like when your husband or wife shares a difficulty and you've got just that perfect advice that you think will help them. Well, with Job's friends, it went about as poorly as when you do that with your spouse. or your teenager. They questioned his doubts. They wondered if he was even saved. They wondered what sin he had done. What was he hiding? God could never treat somebody who was a righteous man like this. You must have been unrighteous. It was just awful. It was just awful. Finally, at the end of this, God speaks to Job. And then at the end of the story, he speaks to the friends. We have this in your handout, Job 42:7. After the Lord had said these things to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. So now take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly. According to your folly. You have not spoken truth about me as my servant Job has. Now, what's intriguing to me about God's assessment here is that a few years ago, I went back through the book of Job and tried to analyze each of the times when one of Job's friends spoke up to try to help Job, to give advice to Job, or to correct him or rebuke him. There are times we need correction and rebuke. I'm not saying that. But there was something that they were missing. Now, at the end of that study, what I realized was there were 12 instances where one of the guys spoke up. And if you look at each one of those 12 instances, each one of them are speaking some aspect of truth about the nature of God. God is righteous. God is faithful. God is just. God is long-suffering. God is merciful. So they were on track regarding the theology of God, but the application of those truths was terrible, and they had no idea. But God points this out in the verse we just read. Again, verse 8. Take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job. Sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you. I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly. Their folly wasn't the truth they were saying about God. That was true. Their folly was the application of those truths to Job. They made his life miserable by this. And then he says, you have not spoken truth about me. And that is an amazing statement. Because you could look back at all 12 of these conversations and you would think that for the most part, their truth about God's character is impeccable. But not quite. Not enough. Not mixed together with the other attributes of God. And the effect was to be a tremendous discouragement to Job. Now, what this reminds me of, and I want you to think about this. What does it mean to be with people? What does it mean to be with your husband or your wife? What does it mean to be to be with a friend? With a teenager that's difficult, or with one of your parents who's difficult? What does it mean to be with? And where my mind goes, I think about, well, first of all, somebody is good at, they want to hear what you have to say. And I'm thinking again about Chili's. You sense that somebody really wants to hear what you're saying. But more than that, they want to hear your inner story. What's going on underneath that maybe you're sort of afraid to share, or behind that facade, or you're holding your cards. But they know there are cards there, and there's more to the story than just what they're hearing on the surface. They hear you. They hear your inner story. I think what we might say is they are great listeners. They're trying to uncover even more, not just what your words say, but sort of what you're inferring or what's going on inside of you, the struggles or the battles in your heart. There's another element of with where you just sense that the person likes being with you. They just like you, and they're not in a hurry to go somewhere else. I think about somebody who's demonstrated that they're faithful to you. But more than anything else, besides listening, I would put second, you sense that they value you. They value you. And they know that their presence matters to you? Now, there might be some other words that come to your mind. If there are, let me know later on. That's the best I could come up with this week. To be with you. Now let's take a look at, in the New Testament, an example of this. Jesus is about to be arrested. He goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. Sit here while I go over there and pray. This comes from Matthew 26:36. So he takes the 12, and they sit there, and they are the 11 by that time, and they pray. Then verse 37, he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him. With him. And he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Now, what do you think he wanted? What did he want them to do? What would it mean to be with him in that particular situation? Why not just be alone with God the Father and pour out his soul to God? Of what value would it be to him to have those three guys with him while he's praying? Think about where your mind goes with that. Verse 39, going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. He's looking at being arrested, tortured, dying on a cross. And he's saying, if there's any way else to do what you want to get done, I'm in. But if not, I'll follow you. Not as I will, but as you will. Then he returned to the disciples and found them sleeping. Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Now, some of you who know me pretty well know that I can sleep with the best of them. I'm good at sleeping. I can fall asleep under any conditions, and when I'm gone, I'm gone. I'm the guy that as a lot of you know, that fell asleep while he was sharing the gospel with a college student. That's hard to do. And worse than that, I was training two other college ministers how to share the gospel with a college student while I fell asleep. God have mercy. I'm also the guy that fell asleep while I was doing a counseling session I was conducting. You're not supposed to do that in counseling course. Don't fall asleep. In fact, I don't remember who it was. It might have been somebody listening to this message. Anyway, so I'm not really coming down on the disciples about sleeping. Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour? What was it Jesus wished they could have done? What would have made a difference? Verse 42, he went away a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more, prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near. The Son of Man is to be betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. So Jesus knows what's going to happen is imminent. It's going to happen any moment. And the guys he was hoping would be with him are sleeping each time. Now, let's just do a hypothetical. Let's say that you knew there was a problem, a medical problem, and you went to the doctor, and the doctor suggested that we do more testing. And when you came back for the results of the test, the doctor said something like, we're not really sure what it is, but we think we ought to do a biopsy just for precautionary sake. And you think, biopsy, cancer. So you go in for the biopsy, and that's usually not a very pleasant experience, at least in the Gatchell household with the two of us. And then it's time to go back for the results. And let's say that you asked three of your friends that came to you and said, well, what can we do? Well, we're going to come and we'll be at the waiting room while you're there. And so you go in, you drive there with your wife or your husband, and you're sitting in the waiting room, and the three friends walk in. And within minutes, the nurse comes and says, it's Mr. Gatchell, Mr. Adams, Mrs. Ack, it's time to come in. So you go in, and you sit down for the pathology report, and you find out that, yes, it's a tumor, it's malignant, It's a fast-growing, and it's already metastasized. You're sitting in the doctor's office with your husband or wife, and you just hear this news. Now, if you're a husband, you look at your wife, and she has tears in her eyes, and she's sort of just softly sobbing. Or if it's your wife, and it's you, you're just sort of dumbfounded by all this, and it just sort of knocks you for a loop. They figure out what's next, the next appointment, when you're supposed to come back, and you both walk out dazed back into the waiting room, and your 3 friends are there. One of them is playing Candy Crush on his phone. One of them is watching the TV where it has ESPN. And the third one is asleep. Now, what goes through your mind? What do you wish you could have walked into that waiting room to see? This is the difference between with and clueless. With, the power of with. Well, as we've gone through COVID over the last, it's almost 2 years, is that right? As you know, if you've been with our church for a while, we have, no matter what's happened, generally speaking, we have told you, our people, do what's in the best interest of your health. If you have people at home that are susceptible, they have health issues, stay home. If you feel comfortable coming, come. Thankfully, we have an amazing tech team. And every week, they faithfully put this on live stream. And so our folks have had the opportunity to stay home, whether it's COVID or health related, or you just had a long night the night before and woke up late, or just want to sit down with some pancakes rather than come and put a name tag and coffee. And we are thankful that we've been able to do that. But having said that, you all know and feel the disconnection that's happened over the last few years. Or the sense of isolation. The sense of something's missing. We are not with. Now, I think of this, I think about the early church, Acts 2, 42 to 47, 6 great verses. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. Let's go to the next verse. All the believers were together, and had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. There was something about being together that enabled generosity to happen more so than if we would on our own. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, ate together with glad and sincere hearts. I love how the connection with together, meet together in temple courts. They were together breaking bread, eating with glad and sincere hearts. I think those two things are connected. There's something about being together with other people that when life gets really, really hard, helps to lighten the heart, to give us joy and happiness. I think of this as we piggyback on each other's joy or good experiences. Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. Then I think about this last illustration with Jesus. He gets off the boat. There's a big crowd of people there, and thousands of people. And Matthew records that as he went ashore, he saw a great throng, and he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. He saw thousands of people, and he knew what was true about them, whether they knew it was true or not. They were harassed, helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Now, if you went to work tomorrow, and you walked in at a meeting, and there are 10 of you around this office table, and you were to say, it's my observation that all the other 9 of you are harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd, you might be having to buff up your resume to find people would think you were nuts. Harassed and helpless? What do you mean I'm harassed and helpless? And yet, what Jesus knew is that all of us as people hold our cards pretty close to the vest. We really don't let people know very much what's going on inside of us. But Jesus knew what was going on inside of us, and he puts these words to it: harassed, helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Now, what does that mean? Is that true of everybody to some extent? If you're going to be with people, this is information you need. You can't just sit there and look at the facade and be with the facade you see and think deeper relationships are going to be built. That's naive. What does it mean? Harassed is the Greek word skulo, like we get our word from skull, and it means to flay something or to skin something. Or the idea is to skin, think about skinning the flesh off of somebody's skull. That's the imagery that the Greeks used for harassed, bothered. Then he says helpless. It's the word ripto. And the word ripto means to fling something, like a frisbee. Flayed, like skin, harassed. Fling, helpless. Meaning that no matter how hard people were trying to make life work without a real relationship with God, they just couldn't do it. It just wasn't happening. Everything seemed to be harder than it needed to be hard, and struggle and relationships sort of slowly spiraling down the tube, and I just don't know how to make it stop is the idea. And then he says, like sheep without a shepherd. Here the imagery is, let's say that over lunch you were thinking about this thing about God being with you. What if God wasn't with you? What if he said, you want to live life on your own? Good luck. Go do that. And on Monday morning you realized that God was vacant from your life. And you were left to your own resources to do life. That's what Jesus saw in the people when he got offshore. Now, what's the problem there? Harassed, helpless, what's the problem? The problem is what he saw was the core commitment in human nature is my well-being first. That's our dilemma. That's the enemy. That every one of us has that core commitment above everything else. My well-being ahead of yours. Marriage problems spiral from that. Problems with teenagers spiral down from that. Problems at work, drama, Moses with 2 million people crossing the wilderness, all comes back to that. What Jesus says, and we'll finish with this from Matthew 11, come to me, he says. He doesn't say, this is not a knock against Bible study. I like Bible study. He's not saying, come to the Bible study. You who are weary and heavy laden or burdened, I will give you rest. It's a relationship. And oftentimes the Bible is used. And sometimes in a Bible study that happens through other people. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I am gentle and lowly in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy. My burden is light. This means with. God is with us. And I hope you'll lock that door if you're one of his people. That never will change. The challenge is to relate to the other people in the same redemptive way he relates to you. That same kind of with others. Let's pray together. Father, a moment ago I mentioned our core commitment is my well-being ahead of yours. And for some of you, if you heard that and you resonated with that, and something sparked in you that said, that is my deepest problem. That's the deepest cause of marital conflict. Conflict with teenagers, conflict with relatives, conflict at work. my well-being before yours. This is what the Bible calls sin. And that will not go away just on its own or just because you want it to. It will only go away through a relationship with Jesus Christ that has to do with the cross. He died for this very thing, what the Bible calls sin, a core commitment to my own well-being first. And he wants to take that from you. He wants to redeem that. He wants to change who you are by nature. And the way that happens, and the way the Bible says the only way that happens, is by looking at Jesus on the cross and saying, this is true. I am a sinner by nature, and I need the forgiveness and the shed blood of Christ if I'm ever going to be different and if I'm going to be saved. The only thing that God asks you is just to admit the truth of this and to come to him and say, would you forgive me and make me new? Jesus Christ, come into my life this morning and change that core commitment to my own well-being from something that's central to something on the periphery. You might just pray a simple prayer like this with me. Lord Jesus, please forgive me for my sin. Thank you for the cross. Thank you for your blood that allows me not just to be forgiven, but to be cleansed and to begin a new life with a new source. Thank you that you promised to come into me and to be with me from here on out. And now, Lord, help me know what it means to be with people. My husband, my wife, my kids, my parents, my friends, people at church. Help me to relate redemptively with